Yeah, sorry, I think next time, if there is another next time, then we will check the thing beforehand.
We are live now, so we can start.
Yeah, okay.
Hello, everyone. In the present times, sustainability is becoming an increasingly important topic, and Adani is putting in a lot of effort to lead the industry in this direction. It is therefore the right time to have a discussion with a leader who is at the forefront of this development at Adani's Sustainability Group. Distinguished Professor Emeritus Arun Kumar Sharma is the Group Head for Sustainability and Climate Change and the advisor to the chairman of the Adani Group. Professor Sharma has been associated with many academic institutes, including Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the University of New South Wales. Till 2019, he served as the Deputy Vice Chancellor and the Vice President for Research, Commercialization and Innovation at the Queensland University of Technology and facilitated the development of research programs in renewables and hydrogen. He has played a critical role in the governance of health and medical research institutions and currently chairs the Council of QIMR Berghofer Medical Research Institute. He is a strong advocate for research collaboration between the industry and the university and has served as a member of the World Economic Forum Global Future Council on Innovation Ecosystems. Alongside these roles, Professor Sharma continues to foster strong business and research links between Australia and India. Professor Arun Kumar Sharma, we heartily welcome you to the Red Brick Summit. Would you like to share with us any initial words before we move on to our main discussion?
Well, thank you for the introduction. And I do apologize to the audience for a slight delay in start because of some technical difficulties. I think sustainability is one of the most important topics today. And let me put that in context why it is an important topic and why it is important for India and for every business in India. One of the things that we have to understand is that India needs to grow its economy multiple-fold if its people have to have the quality of life they deserve. There's no question about that. But that growth has to be responsible because we are facing the adverse impacts of a warming planet and the incidence of climate-related climate-related impacts are being felt everywhere in the world. And the challenge for India is how to do it in a way that it is responsible. India does not have the luxury for the planet or for itself because the adverse impacts of global warming will be felt by developing countries in a bigger way. It cannot take the path that Europe and North America took or the path that even China took. It was able to transform its economy where the quality of life of an average Chinese citizen has increased. And India has to do the same, but it has to do it in a responsible way. In doing so, India also has a challenge because we have always been energy poor in India. Other than coal, it is very difficult to find another energy resource that India can rely on. India has to import much of its natural gas. India has to import uranium. There is hydroelectric power, but that also poses a challenge. If you try to expand it significantly, there could be ecological damage. The communities have to be displaced. So India has this challenge of increasing the size of its economy, which requires the buildup of its infrastructure and which requires multiple-fold increase in energy, and it has to do it in a responsible way. And in this challenge lies India's opportunity. And I think that's something that we can pick up as we continue in this conversation. So it's a great challenge, but in challenge lies the opportunity to leapfrog some of the other economies as India sets out in a journey towards its net zero goal.
So, as you told that it is a huge challenge and also there lies an opportunity for India. So we would like to know about your views regarding how India is faring to achieve its own sustainability goal over the last few years.
So I think if one looks at the responsible approach that India has taken, India has to grow the economy, as I said, and India has to expand its energy. But the Prime Minister Modi's solar vision is for the world to see. And so the investment in solar and renewables broadly, including wind, has been one of the great success stories of India. And as you know, at COP27, the COP26 in Glasgow, the Prime Minister set out a number of goals. And it's a very responsible goal. Some of the goals, as you know, is actually reduction in the intensity of emission. So as India's economy grows, its emissions don't grow at the same rate. And then there is a pathway to a certain amount of reduction. The Prime Minister also said that 500 gigawatt of capacity, in renewables from non-fossil sources will be built. So these are some of the mechanisms by which the electricity system will be decarbonized. But that is not enough because, as you know, renewables are intermittent. During the day, the sun shines, the wind can flow at times, and at times it may not be there. So we need to find solutions to energy storage. Batteries, are one possibility, but we also know that the cost of battery is significantly high. And this is where the National Hydrogen Mission becomes quite critical. And so India, by having a hydrogen mission, is actually going to address the energy storage in the long term. And it will also be critical for decarbonization of many of the sectors which we can discuss. So India's approach is very responsible. And in some ways, India spends $160 billion a year in energy imports. It is a debilitating yoke on the economic growth of India. And so there is every incentive to find energy independence. And this is why India is progressively putting more and more effort in renewables. And Adani Group, as you know, is at the forefront of the renewable transition and also the green hydrogen. So that is, in a way, the most important step that India is taking.
Thank you so much, sir. So as you rightly mentioned that India has laid out some very responsible sustainable development goals. And as you briefly touched upon towards the end, we would really want you to elaborate on how do you think Adani will play a very crucial role towards helping India reach their sustainability goals in the upcoming decade?
So, as you know, our chairman's vision is nation building. He has never shied away from investing in businesses, whether they are emission intensive, but they're needed for India's growth. So he is building India's infrastructure in terms of ports, in terms of airports, in terms of roads and highways. And also he has bought cement business from Holcim because that is needed. Our per capita cement consumption in India is significantly lower than even China. And we all know that Indian infrastructure has to grow. So his priority is nation building. But he's doing it in a way that the group is better positioned to decarbonize these sectors in the long term. So let me give you a few examples. The growth in renewables is to decarbonize the electricity grid. Okay. The investment in green hydrogen does provide further pathways to decarbonize. So if you look at the greenhouse emissions of a business, there are three types of greenhouse emissions. One is scope 1. Scope 1 emissions, they are from the direct operation. So you might use diesel fuel or you are using in operations certain things. So the emissions that come from that are called scope 1. The scope 2 emissions are actually about the emissions from the electricity that you buy for your operations. And so if they are made from coal, they will have higher emissions. If they are solar, then they will be lower emissions. And scope 3 emission is the emissions that your upstream value chain and downstream value chain does. And they're actually difficult to address. But if everyone addresses their scope 1 and scope 2, then scope 3 will be taken care of. Okay, so what businesses have to do is give some incentive to their downstream customers to reduce their emission, and also pay a premium price to their suppliers to reduce their emission. And this way the behavior will change. Now, what the group is doing is to address the operational emission that is scope 1. It is looking at electrification using biofuels, because when you use biofuels, then it is carbon neutral, because they were produced from plants, and when the plants grew, the carbon dioxide was taken from the atmosphere, and when that biofuel is burned, then the carbon dioxide goes. But we also know that there are limited amount of biofuels that you can use, because then you get into the food versus fuel debate. But there are some of the initial steps that have to be taken. Scope 2 emission, the group can easily do that because we are already the largest renewable energy company in India. So we will be able to progressively source green electricity for many of our businesses. And scope 3 is you work with your partners. But the challenge is that a path to net zero is going to be almost impossible to achieve for many sectors of the economy unless we have green hydrogen. Now, let me give you a few examples. And many of you, I know that IIM graduates, unlike Western countries, most of you probably have some kind of engineering or computer science or technical background. So let me try to sort of explain. Let's take the case of airports, okay? Now, airports operations, we can address that. The buses can move to fuel cell buses, battery electric buses. The operations and all that can move that. But the airports have to account for the emissions when the airplane is flying within 3,000 feet of the airport, okay? So that is the responsibility of the airport within 3,000 feet, not of the airline. And you might wonder, why is that the case? Well, that's the case because if the airport is poorly managed, then the airplane will be circulating and burning more fuel, and it will be putting greater emission. So the penalty comes on the airport. So the airports are always made sure that you try to get them land and take them off, without any delay. And of course, taking off, there is no issue, because once you have taken off, you have to take off. Unless the aviation industry gets to net zero, the airport will have a lot of difficulty to get to net zero. Now, the most probable pathway is to make aviation fuel sustainable, okay? And the fuel is basically kerosene. The kerosene that we use in Indian villages in kerosene oil lamps, that's actually the aviation fuel. Now, e-kerosene is a kerosene that has been made by carbon dioxide, either captured from the atmosphere or from the carbon dioxide that we produce in our industry. And that can be combined with green hydrogen when the price of green hydrogen comes down to make methanol and then eventually e-kerosene. So green hydrogen will become very critical for a sustainable aviation fuel over the next 2 decades. And without that, it is very difficult to think of the aviation industry decarbonizing. People say for small planes, you might be able to have batteries, but batteries, the size becomes too heavy and you can't sort of decarbonize the aviation sector that way. You can try to do fuel cell, but any new technology requires 20, 30 years of testing because aviation is so safety conscious. Take the example of shipping. It is now generally understood that shipping will decarbonize by moving to green ammonia. What is green ammonia? It is ammonia that is produced from green hydrogen. What is green hydrogen? It is hydrogen that is produced from electrolysis of water using renewable electricity. So shipping will also depend on green hydrogen to convert that into green ammonia as a fuel. If you take the example of cement, now cement is needed for India, but it is highly carbon intensive. So one can try to do lots of things, capture the carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide can be stored inside concrete. because then it doesn't go back to the atmosphere. But still, there will be some carbon dioxide left. So you try to capture the carbon dioxide. Some countries have underground wells where they can store the carbon dioxide. India may have limited scope for doing that. So again, what you do is that the carbon dioxide that you have produced, you combine that with green hydrogen, and then you make polymers from there like PVC, which are required in building materials, and they are stored that way. So those are the pathways we will be exploring with the business. So we are thinking about the net zero transition for every business in terms of reaching to net zero. And what we are finding is that the last mile for the decarbonization journey is via green hydrogen. And hence, the chairman's vision of investing $70 billion over the next decade in the green hydrogen value chain is going to be critical, not only to help India become energy independent, but also to help decarbonize the group's businesses and also create a pathway for other businesses in India to decarbonize so the goals of net zero can be met. So I hope I have explained to you some of the examples of what we are doing and how we are thinking about the decarbonization journey for many of our businesses.
Thank you so much, sir. It was very exciting indeed to know about the green hydrogen aspect. But all of your initiatives, I understand, towards the airline industry or the shipping industry, they are all large-scale businesses that Adani is really trying to, bring in sustainability into. I have one more follow-up question on that.
Yeah.
So we wanted to know what are Adani's strategies, particularly for fostering grassroots innovations on the ESG front. How do you think Adani is able to grow up more innovations in all of its businesses towards, of course, sustainability? Yeah.
So I think ESG, is much broader than just the environmental concerns. The social concerns are important, and the governance concerns are there, and they're all being sort of addressed. But I think the grassroots innovation is actually quite an interesting sort of dimension that becomes very important as we go forward. So one of the things that we have to do in India is look at more innovation in the sustainability, climate change, and energy transition that is taking place in our universities and research labs. And one of the challenges that we have is, while India has produced great engineering schools and great MBA programs, and also increasingly great law schools, the scale of R&D in Indian universities hasn't kept pace, given the size of the economy, given the scale of human capital and talent that we have. But India can't overnight just suddenly become a major force in R&D, because those things take time to grow. But now the challenge for India is, when we look at some of these sectors, because these sectors present a great opportunity for India, then we can't just rely on absorbing technology from international institutions or international companies. Some areas, if India is to take the lead, it will have to build its own innovation, its own R&D, and its own human capital. And this is why the universities will have to play a very important role. Let me tell you something very simple. Adani is now investing in green hydrogen in a big way. Reliance have another ambitious program. Renew Power, L&T, you talk about all these companies, the public sector organizations, they're all investing, and all of them have to be successful for India to transform itself and become a global superpower in the energy transition. Okay. But you know what is going to be the biggest bottleneck? The biggest bottleneck is going to be human capital. Everyone is trying to hire R&D professionals in this area. And there's hardly a pipeline that exists. So this is something that the country has to develop. And that kind of innovation is going to be important. And why universities? Because when you do research in universities, you get a lot of the research done by PhD students. And when the PhD students graduate, they become more researchers, more faculty in universities, but they also get hired by corporate R&D labs, and the multiplier effect is very significant. So what I would say is that that area for India becomes a priority. The second thing about grassroots innovation, the group obviously has got the Adani Foundation, and in many tribal areas, it is looking at empowering the community in terms of plantation, in terms of women empowerment, the public health system, and innovation is part of all of those initiatives. But one interesting shift that has happened in the business over the last half a decade is that the group has been a business-to-business player, whether it is ports or whether it is airports or it is thermal power or renewable power. But increasingly, we're also becoming a B2C enterprise. So we distribute, we reach into the consumers' houses with Adani Total gas distribution. In Mumbai, we distribute electricity. With Adani Wilmar, we go into everyone's homes and kitchen. And now with airport business, all the opportunities and challenges of a B2C business come to you. You have a slightly suboptimal experience in Mumbai airport, and you flood the social media in terms of your experience. So that gives us a reach and a responsibility to encourage customer behavior on sustainability front. How can we educate the customer to use less of the pipe gas? Already, our distribution business in Mumbai is providing a renewable electricity at a premium price. And there are customers that are prepared to pay that price. So with the reach to business to consumers, you will see more initiatives where we can encourage and provide innovation at the grassroots level. Because ultimately, changing the mind of consumers, giving them incentives for less carbon incentive pathways is how we change behavior.
So, sir, you talked about the lack of R&D professionals in India. So I would like to know more about from Adani's point of view, the role of partnerships or collaborations, especially not just related to academics, but also between industry and government.
So, we are obviously, talking to a lot of universities. We are trying to understand the capabilities they have. And we are also building our own R&D program because we have some of the resources that we can recruit, even if people are coming from overseas. And I'm sure other players are doing the same. Reliance, has had a very proud history of building R&D in many of the businesses that they are. So I think the corporate sector is obviously building the teams that they need right now because they can't wait. Okay, but at the same time, we are talking to universities. We are talking to see how we can assist them in building capacity, how we can provide the set of questions that they need to work. See, often what happens is the questions that universities work can go in any different direction. And what we will try to encourage industry is that these are the questions that industries in the Indian context are facing. And maybe someone else in another country may not appreciate that nuance, and they may not be solving those problems. We have to solve our problems ourselves. So that's another way that corporates like Adani will be influencing the game. And then, of course, we have to partner with global universities. And many of India's big businesses have been doing it for decades, and we have to do that. That will be sort of quite important. So I think we're at a journey, and of course, whenever the government is looking for consultation on what needs to be done, our sort of leaders are there to provide input, because ultimately it is a Team India. It's a Team India initiative. The decarbonization of the Indian economy, as India multiplies its economy several fold, is a Team India effort, and everyone has to play a role. And you coming up as future leaders in business have to play a very important role. And I'll have some advice for you, what the real world is going to look like as opposed to what you are learning now.
That was really insightful, sir. Looking at it in a different light, so I wanted to know, like, how important is ESG from a business point of view for a private company? Is there really a competitive advantage for companies doing well on ESG scores, or do you only hope that the benefits will be realized somewhere in the future?
No, there is serious advantage on better performance, for better performance on ESG. Let me give you a simple example. Increasingly, India and Indian companies have to raise funds in the global market, because without foreign direct investment, we won't be able to find the capital that is needed, or the scale of the capital that is needed to transform Indian economy. And the global markets, they're ready for it. How many countries are growing at 6 to 8% a year? So they're ready to invest in India. So they're looking for credible players who are prepared to economically perform, because that's the basic thing. Otherwise, they won't get return on investment. But these people are being watched by the ratings agencies. They're being watched by people who give them funds to invest. They have their own sustainability agenda. They're very conscious of what's happening to the planet. And so you will find now that if you're not performing very well in ESG rating, your cost of capital goes up. Okay. And hence your business viability, your return on investment, becomes less attractive. And so just you have to, you've probably done a lot of assignments in your MBA class. Just add a few percentage, a few basis points to the cost of capital and see how many projects actually, suddenly from being very attractive become less attractive. So that's one way that we are finding that this is actually sort of going to be quite important. The other thing is, the most important asset that most companies have is human capital, the talent pool that we have. And the younger generation is very conscious. They're aware of sustainability. So if a business is to attract and keep the new generation of talent, they're purpose-driven. They're driven by a mission. And when they see that their company is actually serious about it, is at the forefront of technological adoption in ESG, they will find a meaning and purpose, and they will stick with you. And that, as you know, is a direct sort of competitive advantage that a business can have. So there are just two examples where I can give you. Now, I haven't seen the latest, figures, but even before COVID, there was a clear correlation between higher stock market performance and better ESG ratings. Okay, and the good thing you will find is that promoter-driven companies are actually more interested in ESG because the market cap increases with better ESG performance. But often in the initial stages, ESG actually is a greater expense on the company. So companies that are less promoter-driven and they are CEO-driven, they tend to look at, what is next year, what's my margins this year? And obviously, if you're investing more in reducing emissions and things like that, it can appear that your short-term profits are affected. So companies have figured this out, that the executives are trying to focus on that. So they're providing long-term incentive. They're even putting ESG now as part of the incentive structure. But the promoter-driven, they're more interested in the market capitalization because that's where the value comes for them. So you will find that ESG is becoming a very serious topic in boardrooms. It's becoming a very serious topic with investors and the people who give money to the investors. And it's a very serious topic by the ratings agency, who these investors rely on evaluating the ESG performance. And many of you, will probably end up working in the ESG space. Many of you might be working for raters in the future, and many of you will, recall your engineering background and driving specific projects in the decarbonization journey.
Thank you so much, sir. So now the next question that we have is slightly on a different note, slightly on a personal note, honestly. But when we saw about your long career, we saw that you played a significant role working as a professor in computer science, information technology. So we were really curious to know, how did the shift from being a professor of computer science, how did you come up to the field of sustainability? What was your thought process? How did you make a shift in your career, sir?
So the moment I learned something, I leave that field. Okay, so what you have to, if you want one advice, is have a growth mindset and give yourself a task that in the next 2-3 years, you will actually master a totally new field or a totally new discipline. Now, my journey is fairly straightforward, okay, in some ways. In my time, when I graduated with +2, computer science was becoming very hot. But I had interest in computer science because even because I like maths and physics. And at that time, I think just IIT Kanpur may have had computer science, and I probably didn't have a high enough JEE ranking to get that. But I had a good CBSE merit list rank, and BITS Pilani gave me one of the 9 positions in computer science. So that's how I landed in computer science. Then I thought that I'll work in AI. So I ended up in the US to do a PhD. And then I somehow landed up in Sydney, and I liked the weather. So I became a faculty in computer science at University of New South Wales. And then I started sort of working in different areas of computer science to help build the talent. And I became a head of school and everything. I helped build some of those institutes in Australia. But then I was getting bored of computer science because I was interested in everything else. So the opportunity came to become a deputy vice chancellor for research. And that allows you to look after every discipline in a university. And I served in that role for 15 years. So you have to build medical research institutes. You have to build sustainability initiatives in solar or hydrogen. You have to build research programs in music. And even you have to build research programs in the business school, for example. So I helped them with their Center for Nonprofit Studies, created a partnership with MIT on entrepreneur ecosystems. So law school, you have to build research programs. So you get a thorough understanding of different disciplines, what are the drivers. And that actually for me has been one of the more defining aspects. So when I decided to step down in university, a lot of people always wanted me to go into the corporate sector. The chairman had asked me to join the board in 2011 in Australia when he had bought the port. So I had been associated with the group. He said, come and help me with digitalization. And I said, but it's boring for me, and you can find anyone else to do digitalization. And then I said that you are better positioned than anyone else to take advantage of the green hydrogen. And then we found that everyone was complaining about Adani Group when Adani Group was doing more for the green transition. So we decided that we have to have a sustainability and climate change function at the group level. And so I said, okay, I'll help set it up. So we undertook an entire mapping of the group's carbon footprint. We are now developing strategies, working with different businesses about how the decarbonization will take place. So that's sort of very simple journey. Whatever it takes, we just get into it. And you will find that if you have that open mind, then it'll all become easy. And you have to go in that direction, because the half-life of business models is very small now. Okay. And so if you do not have the growth mindset to move from one business model where you may have succeeded to another, you will find your career prospects will be suboptimal. And remember, having a science and technology background is always a plus. What the MBA program does is it adds the business model, the organizational aspects of running a business and whether a business model is going to be viable or not. And obviously, you can put a price on carbon or increase the interest rate in your business model because the group is not rated highly in ESG, then you can do all that. But the other aspect that you must pay attention to is the regulatory framework, because business models are defined by regulatory framework. And if your business model is becoming so anti-society, the regulatory framework will change. Your social license to operate will change. Remember that every time there has been a change in regulation in the corporations law, it has been post a scandal. So having an understanding of the regulatory framework and taking advantage of how you can come up with a new business model with the regulatory framework is what's going to give you that sort of competitive advantage on top of what you're doing with your MBA program. I always say that, when I'm looking for people to work with me, I want a top engineering graduate, a top business, someone who is an engineering graduate with a IIM MBA and a national law school degree, all in one. Then they're the absolute professionals for the future. I'm not saying you now go and do a law degree, but just pay attention, take courses to understand the legal framework, to understand in that industry what is happening. And there's another advantage of the law degree. What I have found is that engineering MBA combinations, they're great at the technical ability and they can make great PowerPoint decks, but they can't write, okay? But the law graduates can write. They may not do the other two things well. So in this day and age of PowerPoint decks, differentiate yourself. Learn how to communicate to an audience with passion and rigor. Learn how to write succinctly and directly, okay? Because some people just want to read one page. They don't want to see a PowerPoint deck, okay? And some people want to see a PowerPoint deck. You have to understand your audience. And I'm sure you get this kind of advice all the time from your professors. But I can tell you, as someone who recruits either PhDs or MBAs that want to go on a journey, these are the things I'm looking for.
So, sir, that was very inspiring and insightful. So now we would like to move to the Q&A section. We have some questions from the audience.
Sure.
So the first question is, you previously talked about the role of green hydrogen. So can you elaborate on the potential that hydrogen can have on the India's development? And what are the key challenges for getting hydrogen from renewable energy? Yeah.
So first the question of what green hydrogen can do. So obviously, let's just take a simple example of electricity generation. Okay. Right now, the price of green hydrogen. So green hydrogen is something that you produce by electrolysis of water. So the equipment that you use for electrolysis is called electrolyzer. So you can supply electricity to it, and then out comes hydrogen and oxygen. And oxygen normally can go into the atmosphere, or you can use oxygen and put it in cylinders, and you can use it for medical or other applications. Okay. So what happens is that there is some loss of energy, and roughly just say half of the energy gets converted into energy in the form of green hydrogen. It's slightly different, but for that sake. Now, if you use the grid electricity, which may have significant amount of thermal coal, then it is not green hydrogen. Okay. So if you use renewable, solar and wind, then it is green hydrogen. Okay. Now, 70% of the cost of green hydrogen is actually the cost of renewable energy. Then 18% of the cost is the electrolyzer and the utilization factor of the electrolyzer. So electrolyzers, if you're only using solar, will only work for 1/3 of the time maximum. Okay. So the cost is higher because your CapEx is not, you're an MBA student, so your CapEx is not being utilized. Okay. So if you combine solar and wind together, okay, then the utilization factor goes up to 40 to 50%. Okay. And the price of green hydrogen, the cost of green hydrogen that you produce comes down. But the problem is that the wind and solar don't happen in the same location. Okay, so you have to have the ability to build transmission lines so you can bring solar wind in one place where the electrolyzer is, and you can produce green hydrogen. Okay, so right now, the cost of green hydrogen in Western countries, like, say Europe, it may be $5, $6 a kilogram. Okay, in India, we believe that it's somewhere between $3 and $4 that we can produce a kilogram. Now, just to give you a comparison, hydrogen in terms of energy is a very dense energy source. Okay, so 1 kilogram of hydrogen roughly has the same energy as 3 kilograms of diesel or petrol, slightly less, just 3 kilograms of diesel or petrol. So Toyota Mirai is the hydrogen fuel cell car, okay? Like the Tesla is a battery electric vehicle car. So on 1 kilogram of hydrogen, Toyota Mirai can run for 100 kilometers, okay? In India, we actually can produce green hydrogen, say around $4 or maybe between $3 to $4. And as Indian companies start building electrolyzers in India at Indian cost, then the price will come down further to sub $3. And, like many large groups have said, they want to reduce the cost to $1 or like, $1.5 towards the end of this decade. And I think this is possible. Now, battery electric vehicles are very, very important for India because they reduce emissions, because electrification is always less carbon intensive than burning diesel or petrol. But they don't scale up very well. Okay. The moment you go to heavy duty trucks, then you will require almost 1/3 of the weight of the truck to be battery, and the charging times becomes huge. Okay. But the hydrogen fuel cell charging time is exactly the same as diesel fuel cell charging time. So at $4, if it is equivalent to 3 liters or 3 kilograms of diesel, you would say that it's already in the money. Why aren't we having it? Okay. Well, the reason is that handling of hydrogen is a bit more difficult. The infrastructure doesn't exist for hydrogen fueling, and transport is like, of hydrogen can be expensive. But slowly and slowly, the infrastructure will be built. There will be use cases. So by the turn of this decade, we can start seeing that some of the heavy duty trucks or the mining trucks will move to hydrogen, green hydrogen, and then that will reduce the emissions. For India, it also removes air pollution. Like, air pollution from diesel vehicles is a challenge. So I've just given you an example of the cost structure of green hydrogen. One possible use case is in mobility. The other thing is the amount of diesel generators that we have in the country. Okay, if we had a cost-effective way to supply hydrogen to different parts of the country, then hydrogen fuel cells, they're the reverse of electrolyzer. They take hydrogen and produce electricity and water. Okay, and both battery electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles are electric vehicles. They have electric drivetrain. In the case of battery electric vehicle, the electric drivetrain, the electricity is provided by the battery. In case of hydrogen fuel cell, it's provided by a fuel cell and a cylinder of hydrogen that is there as fuel. Okay, so they're at that level, they are similar in terms of drivetrain. And again, why it is important for India? So as I mentioned at the beginning, India does not have enough natural gas. Many countries think of natural gas as an intermediate fuel, but for that, India has to get natural gas at $4 per MMBTU, which is impossible in the current market, or the volatility is going to be quite difficult. And Indian thermal power plants are among the youngest in the world, 14 years. So they have more life to go. And for a poor country, it is it'll be irresponsible to say, okay, we're going to shut coal and then buy LNG from Middle East or Australia, and then make new thermal power plants, because they will then, their life will be into the second half of this century. Okay, and the emissions by importing LNG can be very high. So those things have to be fully costed. So we need to think about, is there a pathway out of fossil fuels for India? Now, at a price point of say 80 cents, under $1 of green hydrogen, okay, the price of combined cycle hydrogen turbines will come down. If you just look at how these turbines have come down in the price over the last decade, you can see that there is a pathway to produce baseload power from green hydrogen itself. It will still be at the high end of thermal coal, but at least there is a pathway, okay, that we can find. And if it comes further below 80 cents, then it can be there. So that actually gives India a target. Okay, let's try to bring it down to 80 cents. Okay, and there are companies that are saying that we can bring it down to $1 by 2030. Then maybe my view is that by late 2030s we should get to 80 cents. And there are some projections like that are coming from major sort of engineering consulting firms in the world about that it reaching 80 cents by 2040. So then there will be a pathway out of fossil fuels for electricity generation. But in the meantime, how do we reduce the intensity of our existing thermal power plants? Okay. Now, what happens is that many countries try to have biomass blended with coal. So you can have wood pellets with coal. And again, as I explained, that wood pellets were formed in the plant formation. They took carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And when you burn the wood pellets, you are actually sending that carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere. So that part becomes carbon neutral. But the price of wood pellets have gone through the roof because all the Australian wood pellets are going to Japanese thermal power plants. The American wood pellets are actually going to European thermal power plants because they all want to show to their investors that they're reducing their emission footprint. Okay, but India will also get some wood pellet. But we have to look at something more advanced than just wood pellets. And so we are learning from the Japanese. Japanese have got the same problem. So what they're doing is they have identified green ammonia. Green ammonia is ammonia. There's no difference. It's just that the hydrogen in NH3 has come from green hydrogen. Okay. Whereas in normal ammonia, which we use in fertilizers or in explosive for the mining sector, that actually comes largely from steam methane reformation of natural gas. So it's a highly emission intensive process. So much of the fertilizers in India actually produces a lot of emission because the production of hydrogen led to that. So green ammonia has similar combustion levels to coal. And so what they're doing is they're looking at blending 20% green ammonia with coal, so you can reduce in a similar proportion, slightly less than 20%, the emission of that thermal power plant. And what Adani Power Limited has done is it has signed a MOU with the Japanese company IHI that is developing the burner technology for doing that in Japan so that we can undertake a pilot. So we are currently doing a feasibility study. So we are showing our responsibility in doing everything to make our thermal power plants as emission efficient as possible. And our investment in green hydrogen provides a long-term path away from fossil fuels. And in the meantime, the green hydrogen is not only going to help India secure energy independence, but also help decarbonize the other sectors like aviation, like ports, like cement going forward. So does that give you a picture of how serious we are of not only seeing green hydrogen as a globally leading business opportunity, but showing the responsibility that this is needed for the decarbonization pathway?
Yes. Thank you, sir, for such an elaborate answer. So we have one more question from the audience. So this is about ESG. So if ESG is broken down into its respective components, that is environment, social, and governance, then what is the order of importance of each of these components in terms of investments and managerial effort across different industries?
So I think, you see, they're all equally important, but that's not probably the answer you wanted, okay? They're all equally important. And if you look at many ratings agencies, there are different indicators. You can have 25, 30 of different categories around E, S, and G. And I'll come to E. See, S and G are actually a a result of the evolution of the governance framework in a particular economy. Okay. And so many Western countries appear better on S&G performance because they have had their corporate systems has developed over a long period of time. They have had all these regulations for a long period of time. So they appear that they're performing better. But the Indian performance, is catching up. And so our S&G in India will be similar to international levels because we are raising funds globally. So we can't say that we are India, we will start performing. And so I have no doubt about it because there are incentives to do that. But what we are likely to see, and this is my view in terms of where the world is probably heading, is that it's not very clear, how quickly and rapidly. The worst case scenario is that we might breach the 1.5 degree Celsius scenario by 2040 itself. And the link to the kind of floods we are having in Pakistan or the kind of floods we are seeing in Australia in a very repeated manner, that once we used to see floods once every 10 years, sometimes the same kind of floods are happening twice in 1 year. Okay. You're seeing bushfires around there, drought frequency increasing. And when it is no drought, then it is pelting rain like there's no tomorrow. So if these things start continue, then the focus on environmental will become a priority. And even in environmental, the focus on emissions will become the #1 priority. And in some way, many of you, if you have read The Economist, recently had a headline cover that ESG, basically E matters, and even in E, the small e, emissions matters. Okay. And that, I think, I would like to say that will be quite important because the frequency of these events are increasing. And the moment the market say, okay, that is the highest priority, then businesses will have to focus on that. So I think each and every aspect of ESG is important. But I suspect the emissions will be even more important for the world because ultimately ratings agencies, markets, public opinion will shift depending on the frequency of these events. So I don't know if I have given you an answer. I have given you an answer. What I feel where this direction is heading, the direction is heading for this.
Thank you, Professor Sharma. So now, as we come to the almost at the end of our discussion, we have one last question, which we think will also resonate with most of our audience. You mentioned about this briefly, but it will be helpful if you could clearly articulate about it some more. So how do you think we, the upcoming managers and leaders, can contribute towards sustainability, and what are some of the critical lessons that we as managers of tomorrow must imbibe in our understanding for a sustainable future?
Okay, that's fairly important. Okay, and so read up on sustainability, read up on what you are the businesses that you want to work on, what are the best practice. But challenge your professors. Okay, when you're doing a business case, ask the professor, okay, we are doing the cost analysis of every input, and we are doing the cost analysis of the industrial process. We are looking at the cost of capital, and then we are saying a project is viable or not. You have done countless projects like that, right? Then ask your professor, can they tell you about the materials they are using? What is the carbon footprint of those materials? The process that you are using, what is the carbon footprint of that process? And if there is a price on carbon, does the business model still work? Okay. So if you put that, even if they're not doing it, the exercise that you have done, try to do it try to plug these numbers yourself and play. What it will do is it will give you the sustainability mindset. Okay. You will understand a dimension of the business from an early on as in your managerial career. Okay. And let me tell you, the real world is different. You would have done all these things and you would have gone to the business case and you're coming up with all these great idealistic ideas. Okay. And then at the end of the day, the business will say, well, it's not making money, just do it this way. Okay. And that's all right, because they have different pressures. They have to look after shareholders, but at least you made a point. Okay. And you would have shifted the mindset by opening the idea. See, these managers probably are 10, 20 years your senior. They have come from a different mold. So one of the responsibilities that you have is to educate the organization about ESG. And the better prepared you are, the more influence you will have. And that way, you will have a multiplier effect. And if you feel passionate about ESG, make this your life mission.
Thank you, Professor. With this, we come to the end of a very insightful session. Professor Arun Kumar Sharma, on behalf of the Red Brick Summit and IIM Ahmedabad, we sincerely thank you for your time today for having with us a fruitful discussion around India's progress towards sustainability and Adani's role in it, and also how we as an individuals can contribute towards this end. Thank you.
Thank you.